Hey everyone, Pastor George here, and today I'm coming at you with a President's Day Theolog. Even though President's Day was yesterday, what are the chances that I'm going to be able to talk about the most Presbyterian president ever in the United States history? And we've had a few Presbyterian presidents, but this guy definitely takes the cake. And how that affected his policies and his choices, and how it didn't, maybe. One of the interesting things I did last year was read a biography on every single U.S. president, which was pretty cool. And of course, as a pastor and as a Christian, one of the things I was most interested in, kind of looking for hints and things like that, was the religious life of every president. Because obviously you have all sorts of different schools of thought that say, presidents are only religious for cynical reasons, or they're zealots or whatever, right? And it's very interesting to see that. And I think that might be true in some ways for a few people, but it was interesting just to go through and see like who was and who wasn't, and like things like that. Anyway, I kind of have a list of like the 5 or 4 or whatever most actually religious presidents, but the one who tops that list, or at least is a contender for the top of the list, I think, by anyone, is also the one who's the most Presbyterian, and that is a guy by the name of Woodrow Wilson. And you probably have heard of Woodrow Wilson. He's more recent, early 1900s. He's the one who defeated Taft after Teddy Roosevelt split the ticket. So basically, Roosevelt ran as a Republican, left the presidency. Taft ran after him, who was his vice president, won. Roosevelt wanted to get back into politics, but couldn't run as a Republican because the party wouldn't let him. And so he ran as a third party and basically split the conservative or Republican votes down the middle, and Woodrow Wilson won on the Democratic ticket. And the interesting thing is that all these guys, Taft, Woodrow Wilson, and Roosevelt, were all part of this progressive movement. And really, it was like how progressive you really wanted to be, right? And a lot of it had to do with things that we might not care all that much about today, but were a big deal back then. So like tariffs and trust laws and the amount of gold in a coin, stuff like that, right? It's three things we don't think about, but it became important. But the interesting thing is Woodrow Wilson, more so than the other two candidates, was very religious. He was born in Virginia as a son of a Presbyterian pastor who was a seminary professor, and also was, I know we have a clerk in our church, the clerk of the entire denomination of the Southern Presbyterians, which I think was really called the Presbyterian Church in North America or something like that. But they were called the Southern Presbyterians because they broke with the church in general over the issue of slavery prior to the Civil War. And that's going to be important. They're kind of like the older ancestor of the PCA, which is like a Presbyterian church that's now all over the United States, but was mainly located in the South. But also some of them joined with the PCUSA, which is our denomination as well. So they're kind of all over the place now, but anyway, that's what they were. And he grew up in that environment, right? So he grew up in a Southern, post-Civil War. I think he was born during the middle of the Civil War, or like right after. And so he grew up in that environment and was sent up north for school to Princeton. And he basically stayed in the North forever after that. And he basically stayed in New Jersey because he ended up becoming the president of Princeton University, and then became the governor. So he's actually a Jersey boy, which is really interesting for a lot of us who are in Jersey now, because this was considered his home, even though he was born in Virginia. Then from that, he catapulted into the presidency because he was a very popular governor, and the Democrats wanted someone who was popular to face, Teddy Roosevelt, who was one of the most popular presidents and still is to this day. And so Wilson ran, and he won, right? Now, that could be because the ticket was split or whatever, but Wilson ended up becoming a very popular president during his lifetime and after. Now he's being very much reassessed, and we're going to talk about why that is. But where is his religiosity into this, right? Well, the whole time that Wilson is doing this, right, he went to Princeton, which was and still is a Presbyterian school, right? He was an elder in the church, and from all of his personal writings and stuff like that, we can tell that he's very religious. So he isn't just a president who's religious for show, but this is something he really believes, and he's not just like a, only a church on Sundays type of guy. This is like a Bible study guy, and also Westminster Shorter Catechism memorization sort of guy, right? He's very much a traditional Presbyterian in that respect, right? But he was also part of this progressive movement. And a lot of his reforms he based on his religious beliefs, right? Specifically, like caring for the poor. If you are a fan of our progressive tax system now, you have Woodrow Wilson to thank for that. That means that the more you make, the more you pay, right? It's not that everyone who's at the lower end is paying as much as someone who's making $1 billion. If you like that idea, that's a Woodrow Wilson idea, right? He also did a lot of antitrust laws, breaking up big corporations and stuff like that, and lots of internal things. It might seem small to us today or inconsequential, but like bigger names like FDR and LBJ with their big government programs of like bring wealth to people and stuff like that, whether it's the New Deal or whatever LBJ's was called. I'm blanking on it right now. But those things, right? They both said that they were inspired by Woodrow Wilson. So he really sets the tone of the Democratic Party for the first half and a little bit of the 20th century. So he's a really important guy for that reason. But even to this day, he had like this very Christian missionary spirit of like wanting the United States to play a role in the world, not necessarily to build empire, but to like free people and to bring, freedom, and with freedom, the gospel to other parts of the world. And so he founded the League of Nations, which modern equivalent is the United Nations. So he's really important for that reason as well. And so even this idea that the United States, like, with the current thing that's happening in the Ukraine, this idea that like the United States should go and help the Ukrainians is this like very Wilsonian idea of, beating back forces of evil, bringing liberty, and with liberty, the gospel to other parts of the world. So you have a lot of his religious aspect feeding into that, right? And that's all good. Like, you might disagree with those policies or whatever. I looking at them, they're kind of a mixed bag for me personally. But one of the things I can appreciate is that at least he's doing this from religious conviction, right? Thinking that, this is something the Bible is telling him to do, and so he has to do it. But Wilson is not a perfect person, and I would say even as religious as he is and things like that, he still, and as much of a believer as he was, still had cultural blind spots. And this is where we return to the fact that he was originally part of the Southern Presbyterian Church, because Wilson basically rolled back a lot of the progress that was made on civil rights and other things in order to segregate the federal service. So the federal service actually was desegregated, but Wilson brought it back. And he also was a big supporter of like the Ku Klux Klan, and this is like when they first became a real powerful and cultural force in the United States, right? And that is woof, right? That's real bad. And it's really a shame, right? And that's why I said earlier his legacy is being reassessed, because obviously, as I pointed out, he was very popular, so his name is on all sorts of things in the United States, right? At Princeton University, they had his name on the International Studies building because, he's this international figure and stuff like that, and there are statues of him in, like, Prague and other places like that. But now, right, I say had because Princeton removed his name from the building because of his racist beliefs and things like that, right? And it's really sad more than anything else, right? Because it's this guy who, whether you agree with him or not, was doing these progressive or things for people based on his commitment to Scripture and the belief he could help people, right? And that a Christian should help people, but was still really blinded by his culture and things like that, where he was still unable to see people as equal to him in the eyes of God, right? And it's really a shame, but and that's really the lesson of history, is that we are all like this. If anyone thinks that they aren't, give me 5 seconds. Pull out your iPhone, and I can tell you how you are. The interesting thing here is, right, is that it's very, he's like us in the sense that we are all, especially Christians, right, committed to doing good things, and many of us do them, but we're also very much blinded by our own cultural assumptions and norms and things like that, where we can end up kind of being a detriment. The idea here is that we consistently press our norms up against Scripture, right? And when Scripture tells us to, challenge our culture, that means we have to do it, even if it's something that we don't necessarily want to do, or something that could cause us harm or strain in some way. It means we're still required to do it. And it's when people fail to do that they that their legacy and reputation is really tarnished. And I think Woodrow Wilson is a good example of that. But regardless, despite that really bad stuff, he still is the most Presbyterian president that we've ever had. Unless you want to send me to the White House, I'll start my candidacy next year. So, looking forward to talking about our Bible study tomorrow. Hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Peace out.